Again, welcome, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties that we had. We have a couple of our guests who have joined us, and we will continue to try and get them in and receive them as they come. But first and foremost, let me thank you all for joining us. I'm Dr. Derek Rivera. I serve as the Vice Provost for Diversity here at LSU, and as we have gone through the last 10 days. With the culmination of a lot of energy and effort, we pulled together this town hall meeting for our students, for our staff, and our leadership to talk and have a conversation. And so we'll do just that. It's more than a notion to think how 10 days ago this world changed for so many of us as we all watched the video of George Floyd being brutally murdered. And then we watched also, so many of us, as the following and ensuing protests and demonstrations. To be sure, those were met with lots of different tactics and procedures. These events have included others being assaulted by police and others being injured, and even others being killed. And so the country is in turmoil as it relates to race. And we're going to talk about that today. I want to welcome each and every one of you and hope that you will have a good afternoon with us. We've got some special guests that will join us, as well as a group of fine and outstanding students who will share some of their thoughts. And a couple of our administrators, including our president and provost, have also joined us. Each panelist will be given about 2 minutes for opening remarks and a brief introduction. The student leaders have already submitted some questions in advance, and we'll take those first. But we also want to encourage all of you who are on the Zoom to put questions in the chat box. We have staffers who will be pulling those questions and directing those to us about 2:45 or so. And we'll address as many of those questions as we absolutely have time for. The panelists will then each be given a 30-second closing remark, and then we'll talk about next steps. Following this. We don't end with the question and the conversation, but what do we do next? I want to certainly, before we get started, commend our student leaders, especially our student leaders of our Black organizations. They pulled together a phenomenal peaceful demonstration 2 nights ago in the quad. I think Gideon might talk about it, but the anticipation, as he shared with me, was about 40 to 50 students, Gideon. And then it turned out to be well over 400. And it's just an impressive showing of students, but not just students. We had faculty members there. We had deans. We had administrators, both the president and the provost were in attendance. And we also had a couple of our board members. And so it was a community event that happened earlier this week. We will have more. We will have some more gatherings. We'll have some more virtual gatherings as is necessary. And we'll have some action. I can assure you, Dr. Galligan will speak to some of the thoughts that happened and the requests made by the students early this week, and what the university response is going to be. But I want to let you know, this is a part of what we do. Talking about it is one part, but the action will follow. And so with that, I'd like to have our first panelist, Dr. Tom Galligan, who serves as our interim president of LSU, to open us up with his 2 minutes. Dr. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Derek. I'll do my best to keep it to 2 minutes. It's good to be with everyone today, and good to see you. I wish we could be together in person. But while it's good to be with you, I'm sad for the precipitating reason. The racist violence that resulted in the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and today we add another name to the list, Manuel Ellis in Tacoma, Washington. And I say a list, the list goes on and on and on. It is too long in terms of time. It's too long in terms of names. we've got to change. We've got to do something. And Derek said action. We need to take action. And so we do need to stand together. And as we stand together, we need to all say Black lives do matter. I'm a lawyer. And so Derek calls me doctor. I'm really not a doctor. I'm a lawyer. And I've spent my career trying to work for equality and justice. And I look back and I think if this is still happening, I haven't done a very good job, but I'm committed to keep up the work and to work with you. Where do you start? I want to change the world. I want to change my country, but I want to start at home. And I'm going to start at LSU. So I want to work at home and large at the same time. We had the other night, the students put on Gideon, a very moving event, a very peaceful protest. And I think it's a protest because we're protesting what's happening, and we can't stop until it changes. And one of the things that the students presented to us was a platform with 6 items on it. And I think maybe the 6 items can grow. 6 items of areas where we need to change and do better. And I pledge, as long as I am your interim president, as long as I am in this chair, I mean the president's chair, I don't mean the chair in my bedroom from which I am speaking, but as long as I am in this chair, I promise that we will work with you to effectuate this change. I think, Gideon, we have a meeting, Bryce, and we're going to have a meeting on Tuesday to continue that conversation. And I'm a teacher. I said I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher. And you think about teachers, what do? They talk and they assign homework. But hopefully what they do before they do that is they learn. And to learn means to listen. And so today I look forward to listening and to learning from you so that I can more effectively do more, and I can more effectively understand perspective and be a better ally. So I will close with that for now, and I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Galligan. And we also have a student co-host who I will introduce in just a moment, but I failed to introduce several graduate assistants that will be facilitating questions for us. And if they would just raise their hands so you can see them. Percy Jackson, who's a graduate intern in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. Franklin Soares, graduate assistant for the Black Male Leadership Initiative, and he probably has the largest fan club in here. Anne Marie Herod, who's going to work on hers because she's the former graduate assistant for the Clarence Barney African American Cultural Center, and also the genius behind the Black Women Empowerment Initiative. Those folks could wave or be acknowledged. Do we see them in there? There they go. I want to, at this time, also acknowledge Tyler Hunt, our other co-host. And Tyler, if you want to introduce yourself, I apologize for stepping over.
Oh, it's no problem, Dr. Rivera. So hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Hunt, and I am on the executive board for the Black Women's Empowerment Initiative. It's just an honor and a privilege to actually be on here to be able to moderate or co-moderate with Dr. Rivera in this amazing discussion that so many student leaders have put together. I really wanted to be on this just for the simple fact that I understand that no change that has happened has been without the youth being directly involved in it. I'm an African American Studies minor, actually want a double major in it, and I've studied it. And every movement you've seen, it's come from students, in particular in college. And to be in the type of org that's the first of its kind, Black Women's Empowerment Initiative on LSU's campus, I thought it was important that we be a part of that discussion. So I'm really honored and flattered, kind of nervous to be on this panel, but I want to thank you all for giving me this chance, and I'm so excited to learn and hear from all of you.
Well, thank you, Tyler, and you are absolutely right. I'm going to commend those AAAS folks because you do know well that the movements that have changed this country have all been led by young people. And if we're going to be successful, it's going to take listening to the voices of those who are younger and those who are actually coming up and trying to live out their lives and their dreams, and what kind of futures do they want to shape. And so you've got some older, if you will, Tyler, folks on here. We're going to share, but we're going to listen too. And we hope to get a lot from you. Dr. Haney, I know, is going to talk about the protest the other night and what tremendous insights she gleaned. But all of us are here to learn, all of us. With that, I want to introduce our next speaker. Oh, and by the way, Tyler, she's part of that Black Women's Empowerment Initiative. Folks, pay attention. This is a powerful group on campus, and it is taking the campus by storm. Thank you all for what you do. Next up to share remarks will be a BMLI, another powerful organization on campus, Representative Mr. Devin Woodson.
Thank you, Dr. Veras. Thank you all the panelists and the attendees for coming out. I'm glad to speak. I've been at LSU for 2 years. I've only lived in Louisiana for those 2 years, but this will be my 21st year of life and my 21st year, of course, of being a Black male in this country. So I believe that the conversations that we're about to have, the questions will be asked, and the things that we'll have to challenge ourselves with are things that we can't hide from anymore. Not as a community, not as a campus. And I do think that it's unfortunate that it took George Floyd's death to have this conversation be brought about. And I don't think that it should have taken Trayvon Martin's death or Michael Brown's or Tamir Rice's or Eric Garner or Breonna Taylor or Sandra Bland or the others, but it is being had. This conversation is being had, and we are here to learn, and we are here to challenge ourselves. And I think that if anything is said by every state in the country and 18 other countries protesting this with us, that speaks to the fact that the time to get things done is now, and the time to educate ourselves is now, because this movement can't stop. This is not a moment. And so I think that it's time that we all become accountable for something, that we all take a stand, and that we're all held to a high standard. And that's exactly why I'm here today. Is to hold myself accountable, and to make ourselves kind of uncomfortable enough to challenge the systems and the routines that we enforce that continue the cycle. I want to speak to the concerns that I have as a leader. I want to speak to concerns that I have as a Black man, as a Black student at LSU, because ultimately the decisions that we make set up the situations and the consequences that the future has to deal with. And if this is not something that we're comfortable doing, it would be highly unfair of us to not work to change that for future students who are currently looking up to all of the people and all the panelists on this board. And so I hope that we can all come together and to learn and to make a campus-wide, a community-wide, a statewide alliance against this kind of complacency and against racism. And thank you all.
Thank you, Devin. Next up is no stranger to these activities, and certainly a leader who has very, very demonstrably shown support for not only our Black students, but all of our students, our Provost, Dr. Stacey Haney.
Thank you, Derek. And I just wanted to echo how grateful I am to all of our Black student leaders who organized the #Blackout demonstration Wednesday in response to our collective outrage and grief over the death of George Floyd most recently. And as Devin noted so eloquently, the ongoing loss of Black lives to racial violence. And I echo our president, Black Lives Matter. And listening to our Black students on Wednesday was so powerful and devastating to hear how those students of color experience our campus. And our words of support and commitment to change matter, but our actions will matter more. And we need to be held accountable to do better and to be better. And so I'm grateful for today to listen and to learn. And I am grateful to Dr. Riveras and to Tyler and to the Office of Diversity for organizing this event, and for all of our individuals who are here collectively today to move forward and change. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Tyler.
So next, I would like to call on a fellow Black Women's Empowerment Initiative member. It is Felicia Phillips. Ms. Felicia Phillips, so if you'd like to just unmute yourself and briefly introduce yourself and give your opening remarks.
Hi, as she said, my name is Felicia Phillips. I am a double major here at LSU with political communication and African studies with a minor in history. I am a member of Black Women Empowerment Initiative, and I feel all the stress of the world right now, seeing my Black brothers and sisters die in the streets due to like police brutality. And I love seeing all of like the protests going on. And I think LSU should encourage them. I think LSU, we are on the right track to bring about social change, but obviously, as like everyone has said, it's going to require so much more like from students, so much more from like the community, and it's just going to call for awareness because not enough people are on this chat, not enough people are recognizing the injustice of the Black community. And I think if we keep working on this, we can definitely spread that message to other people. But I'm so happy to be on this panel.
All right, thank you so much, Phyllis, for sharing that. Once again, she is in Black Women's Empowerment Initiative, so it's an honor to be on in this organization with her. And next, I would like to introduce our Chief Murphy Paul. He's the Chief of the Baton Rouge Police Department. So if you'd just like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and give a few opening remarks as well.
Take that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. You know, what's going on in our country should be it should really, we should be awakened by this. Nobody could have predicted that this incident would take it, the response will be not only here, but internationally. And that's why it's important that we must understand the history of policing, not only in Baton Rouge, but in the country, past, present. And we have to acknowledge that our racist and violent past has traumatized people of color. And the history requires us to look at what happened to George Floyd not as an isolated incident, but what it represents, an example of the documented pattern of violence and marginalization and polarization and racism that has been happening to people of color for all too long. And as leaders, we must be committed to ensuring that every action that we do is rooted in equality and accountability, but also in healing. And that's why transparency is so important. That's why conversations like we're having right now is so important because we've never seen this in law enforcement. And what we have to understand is there's some who may not necessarily understand. It is up to us as leaders to help support the passion that our young folks are having right now. I tell you, I've never been so proud to see the commitment and the voice of our young people. And I can tell you as a 50-year-old male, I think we failed them. I do. I think this young generation right now is saying enough is enough. Because we've been having this story too many times over and over and over again. And I believe that's why we see the level of protests around the country. And just maybe this is the one where we're really going to be able to sit down and see some changes in systemic systems that has gotten us here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chief. Thank you so much for your comments. We definitely are excited that you are actually listening and that you are taking an interest in this, and we thank you for that and for your time. So next, I would like to introduce Mr. Gideon Adeyemo. He is a member of the Black Student Caucus and also in student government. I had the honor of being in student government with him in FLC. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, Gideon, and just introduce yourself and give a few opening remarks as well.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's a really great honor to be able to speak in front of all of you, as well as with such wonderful leaders, both in our university, our community, and on campus. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone who came out on Wednesday. It was honestly, it was a wonderful experience to be able to be there with all those people. I mean, some of the people who organized the event, to be honest, were not expecting that big of a turnout. Ms. Tyquise only printed out 20 flyers because that's as many people as we were expecting. You know, it's just, and to see that much support and that much energy from our community was really, really empowering. And I hope that we can prolong that vibe and that energy for change further into the fall and spring semester, and hopefully, you know, throughout our lives, because eventually there will be new issues coming up, and we need that same passion, the same energy coming up. So first, I'd like to thank, all the organizers in the different Black organizations: Camber Cryer, Tykees Keys, Isaiah Jones, Chris Clues, Dominic Cravens, Justin Franklin, and so many others who were impactful in helping us create our platform, being able to speak, as well as Ms. Alasia Johnson and Kiera Miller, who are currently the president and vice president of the Black Student Caucus, working very hard to advocate for all students within the student government, as well as making sure that the Black voice is being heard. And so please, if any of y'all have any concerns, any initiatives, any programming that you want to get pushed through student government or through any of our various Black organizations, please reach out to any one of us as soon as possible. Ask your questions on here, share your story, and let us know how we can help. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gideon. And we do want to thank you also again for organizing such an amazing event. I had to stay with my sister, so I watched it on IG Live, but it was an amazing event, amazing turnout. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Ms. Maxine Crump. She is the president and CEO of Dialogue on Race Louisiana, and she's also an LSU alumnus, so go Tigers. So if you'd just like to unmute yourself, Ms. Crump, and introduce yourself as well, and just giving us a few opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here for a lot of reasons, because I'm an LSU alumnus, but I'm one of the first. I was among the first. I was admitted to LSU after the lawsuit had to pass in order to insist that LSU open its undergraduate school to African Americans for the first time. I was the only African American who lived on campus at the time in the women's housing. And LSU at that time was treating me like a problem that needed to deal with. By that, it sounds like it's way more awful than it was. It was very benign, but the thing is they had to figure out, what do they do with this application for a Black student who wants to live in women's housing? So they put me in a private room, and when a Latino student asked to move in the room with me, they said, "Do you know she's Black?" And she said, "Of course I know she's Black," but they didn't. So I tell people I didn't know whether LSU had put me in a private room to protect me or to protect the other white students. But obviously, the way I took it is I was a problem that LSU had to navigate. And it's so thrilling to be here right now where the voice of the students of color, Black students, are getting a voice in saying what this university is going to be. The protesters are saying what this country is going to be. Citizens who've been left out, marginalized, and a whole bunch of other adjectives that many of you have spoken are in front of us now. And in this moment, I was saying, if my father could be here now, because he walked up to me in the summer of 1964, when in the summer of Freedom Summer, when Black students from other universities around my age were being killed for going into Mississippi, registering people to vote. And I was thinking, I just feel like I'm doing nothing. They're students like me and I'm doing nothing. This is in my head. My father walks up to me and he said, "Would you like to go to LSU?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I didn't even ask him the rest. And so I remember us walking up the tower because that's where we had to go to get our materials for registration. And I was thinking to myself, if my dad could be here now, and all of a sudden I thought, my dad is here and he's very excited about this. Not for me, but for the whole thing that he worked for in his civil rights activism. So yes, we're looking at change. But what I said to someone when I was on the Talk Louisiana this morning, they're talking about change. And I said, yes, there's change, there's lots of change. But those protesters are not out there celebrating change. They're out there saying we need another kind of change. We need more justice and we need systemic change. So the work that I've been doing for the past 20 years that started with developing a dialogue to talk about race, because I saw that there were so many people. I hear people all the time tell me how good people are and how good people's hearts are. Fine, let's use those hearts and minds to do what needs to be done, and that is systemic change. And so we developed a conversation for talking about race, starting with defining your terms. You can't solve a problem that hasn't been properly named. When you ask 10 people to define racism, you'll get 10 different answers. You cannot solve a problem by looking at 10 different ways of looking at the problem or 10 different definitions of what the problem is. So our dialogue on race helps to define the problem. And I got that from dealing with a lot of good people at LSU. I'm not telling you I was mistreated at LSU. I was treated very nice as a Black person. I was not a full university student in the minds of almost anyone there, but no one said that. You didn't have to say it. And when I was asked to speak to the RAs for the upcoming semester last fall, one of the students stood up and said, LSU is celebrating this year that it's having the largest minority enrollment, or the largest African-American student enrollment this year. And LSU was very proud of that. And she stood up when it came to the question time, and she said, I just want to say that I'm very happy that we make LSU look good. I want to make sure LSU makes us feel a part of this campus and that we matter fully at LSU. And that is what I think you guys are saying and what you're speaking of. I love hearing the word accountability from the president. And I like hearing healing, but I also want to say you can't heal the wound that is still that is still wide open. We don't quite know what the wounding is, because some of the wounding is inside. There's been hurt in people that people think is just their feelings hurt. No, there's real hurt. I'm going to tell you a short story, and it's horrifying. That I saw a video of an African-American woman on a plane who was sitting next to a woman who was white, who used the N-word to one of the servers that was a host on the plane. And the woman, the African-American woman, said to the woman who was white, she said, "You're going to sit here next to me, an African-American woman, and use that term?" And the white woman defended herself, and it got to be a real scuffle to the point that they had to restrain the African-American woman. And I said, when I saw that, I said, we may think we're looking at just an African-American woman, or what they call an angry Black woman, but we're listening to 400 years of hurt that rose up in that woman and exploded. And so when we're talking about the pain of being Black in America, it's not just hurt feelings. It's not just something that's offensive when people say, I didn't mean to offend you. It's like wakes up all of the pain and all of the wounding that has been carried from what do they call it? Weathering racism. And one of the things we're looking at now, we're saying George Floyd, but are we realizing that in the moment that George Floyd, that the life was snuffed out of him, the breath, that we're in the midst of a pandemic that's snuffing the life out of people, and it's about breathing. It all came together in George Floyd. Yes, he is the symbol of this moment, sacrificed for sure, not on purpose, but it's still such a moment, because already we had done a dialogue on the pandemic and saying that the pandemic was a health emergency, but racism that's aligned with the coronavirus is a long-standing crisis in America that has existed and usually rises up during pandemics. And then shortly after that, there's Ahmaud Arbery, and then there's some of the others, and of course George Floyd. But the thing is, us saying that had people kind of arguing, but at the moment that George Floyd had the life snuffed out of him in front of everyone, thanks to social media and the young people who did things like video it, these things had gone on all the time, which y'all are saying. And in my father's lifetime, and he didn't want his children to have to go through this. And he became active so that he could help make the change that he could. And I just feel like it was my job to carry that on, not to just take advantage of opportunities. People used to say, oh, such an opportunity. But I felt a responsibility to do what I can do using the skills that I have. And coming from media, the skills that
I think your time is, I'm sorry, we just let you go, but we do have to meet.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
No problem, I just wanted to let you know.
I certainly want to thank Maxine. Maxine has done a phenomenal job as a pioneer, as she mentioned, in the residence hall, for our students on the panel, and for those who gathered the other night. I kept thinking about people like Maxine and AP Thoreau and others who blazed the trail and what their experiences were like. And so this is a privilege to have you on with us today, and we are so grateful. Thank you, Maxine. I want to call on our next student panelist, Kiami Brown Rivers, who has taken the campus by storm with her B-Way, but also our African student organization, and so many other ways. I have to tell everybody, when I met Kiami, I guess it was 2 years ago, I thought she was an upperclassman. She was a first or second week freshman. Phenomenal lady. Kiami?
Hello, my name is Kiami Brown Rivers. I have the esteemed pleasure of serving as the Vice Chair of the Black Women's Empowerment Initiative of the inaugural cohort, as well as serving as Vice President of the African Student Organization. On campus, I think that I have carved out a reputation of being vocal, if not often to a fault, and I am very honored to be able to sit on this panel. Things that I just want to touch on very quickly is the importance and the utility of anger. And I call on the professors and the administration to not only acknowledge the students' anger, but to navigate it in such a way in which it's not invalidated and it's not reduced to being irrational, and understanding that anger flows somewhere. And I also call on all the panelists and everybody listening to acknowledge the history of the police force, which is both the literal and symbolic evolution of slave catchers. And for us to understand this means that we understand the way in which we navigate further relationships with the police, how Black students on campus navigate these relationships, and how we will continue to move forward when we understand that the foundation of how we police Black and brown bodies on this campus and in the world is based on a foundation of societal oppression. And just understanding where we come from and where we will be, and understanding that it is just important to listen as it is to talk, and it is just as important for us to be passionate as it is for us to be peaceful. And I'm very much so looking forward to having the rest of this conversation, and thank you.
Thank you, Kiami. I failed to mention when Maxine was doing her introduction as well, she mentioned the dialogue on race, and I can't pump that up enough. This is a phenomenal experience for certainly our administrators to participate in. I saw a comment in the chat that we should get all of our administrators to participate. I know that Dr. Haney has done it. I have done it. I don't know if Dr. Gallagher has had a chance to do it, but it is a phenomenal 6-7 week experience, which many people call life-changing. Next, I want to introduce a colleague of mine. When we were talking about this town hall, the first name that came to mind that does this work external to LSU, work of diversity, who's done it in a phenomenal fashion at both the University of Rochester. He's done it at Missouri just after they had all their racial unrest several years ago. And now he's leading as the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Virginia. He is a good friend and a colleague. He is Dr. Kevin McDonald. But I have to say, when I invited him, it slipped my mind. His daughter is an incoming freshman to LSU, and I had the pleasure of meeting Kes earlier today. Kevin, go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Derek. It really is an honor to be here, and I feel like I have this double passion welling up inside of me because my daughter is so excited to be joining the Tiger Nation there and getting involved and engaged. I came to the University of Virginia from the University of Missouri system and the University of Missouri flagship campus. My position there was born out of the student protest, and as Devin noted, the protests that are happening around the world as a result of these recent deaths. After the protests at Missouri on November 9th of 2015, between November and December, there were over 89 protests on campuses across our nation. So this is another important moment in time. I really appreciate the student leadership because oftentimes what happens when you have these events is that students and other constituents are reflecting on their own lived experiences and recognizing that there are gaps in those, that there are opportunities to improve the organizational environment. So the students with their recent kind of stand and protests have also provided those opportunities to administration. And I'm encouraged by the sentiments that have already been shared by your president and your provost, because I think what the students are making sure will happen is not that they're just important for issue identification, but that they're also leverage for solution identification. And the thing that the students at Missouri told me, which I thought was incredibly powerful, is that they said the protest didn't just happen out of thin air. They actually tried to engage administration in conversations for 2 years prior to the protest, but felt as though they had gotten to their wits' end. So I just want to encourage the administration there to not let this time pass, to not let the dust settle, remain engaged, because there are systems and structures at all of our institutions that are serving as impediments to progress. And to the extent that you can engage those amazing students there, are leaders of organizations tomorrow, today, in ways that can really eradicate and remove those from LSU, it will have a long-standing transformational impact on that community. So I'll stop there.
And thank you, Kevin. And if for those who don't know the history of the University of Missouri and its campus unrest, it is a predecessor, probably one of the most demonstrable examples of student protest prior to what we're experiencing now. And Kevin came in, and there are certainly remnants of that, but the campus has been revived, and they're moving and making progress. So thank you, sir, for joining us. We also have with us one of our graduate students. We want to hear our graduate student voice as well. And we could not have picked a better representative for these voices than a representative of our Black Graduate and Professional Student Association, Unique Luna.
Thank you, Dr. Ramirez. Like he said, I'm Unique Luna. I just completed my 2nd year in my PhD program here at LSU in chemistry. And I am so honored to be on this panel and be a part of the conversation. So the reason behind my passion for all this is, yes, it's unfortunate we lost another life. And this time we actually have footage of how abuse of power can lead to death, because for centuries we've been saying that we've been treating them fairly, but when you don't have footage, and for people who do not understand or cannot relate, it's hard to fathom the experiences until you can actually visualize it and see it. But in order to actually change that, I believe that we have to figure out what the root of the problem is and actually change it, and figure out how to debunk a system that wasn't originally designed for us. And so with that, I think LSU can be on the forefront of that. You know, it's a public institution that grooms leaders. And if we can create a culture in which we change the narrative and provide equality and equity amongst all, I do believe that this will impact the entire country and the world. And so, you know, people might think, oh, you're just one voice, or what am I going to do? What am I going to say? To be honest, sometimes you might not have the words, but showing up, is doing something. And then from there, next thing, you will learn what you can do next. And so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. And I do look for actual resolutions and deadlines that we can actually implement, because it's easy to say what you can do, what you will do, but holding, I appreciate that our administration is willing to be held accountable. And I know, like I mentioned at the protest, Gideon mentioned, to also for the students to hold the students leading this cause accountable as well, to ensure that this does not get left behind and that we do make a change that impact our entire society and our world. And thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, Unique. A powerful force on campus as well. I've had the privilege of watching her the last couple of years as she's navigated these spaces, and many times with challenges. Way before all of this broke out, she's always conscious, and as is Kiami. Lastly, we have a staff member who is part of our LSU Mental Services. Miranda Brown will join us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here on behalf of the LSU Student Mental Health Services and the broader Student Health Services. As I stated, it is an honor to be here amongst such powerful catalysts for change. That's what I hear everyone that has said a word. I hear catalysts for change. It's important for a mental health professional, myself, identifying as a mental health professional and an African American woman, which both sides of those have their own need for activism. So this is very important to me to be here today, to be on the changing side of the conversation. You all have said exactly some of the things that I've already had in mind to say. Healing is one part of what needs to happen. But as Ms. Crump said, we can't heal if we don't know what we're identifying the problem is to heal. So we have to be able to identify problems. And as a mental health professional, we are solution focused. We are problem solvers. We help navigate anger, as my sister Kiami said. That is what our job is to do. So we're here to validate those things. People have to be able to validate why we see violence and understand that there was 400 years of things that built up. That's why you see that. And then when we begin to heal, to understand those things, then we can start to identify and heal and move forward. And then that creates the change. So I'm just excited to be a part of the conversation and to have my position in the movement that is happening right now.
Miranda, you would be proud to know that at our protest rally the other night, we had a student with a shirt that said mental health matters, expressed in the same way with a little bit more passion. She was driving home the point of the need for mental health and sound mental health. So we've got some people who are paying attention and doing so well. I want to also say too, Miranda mentioned the pain that's out there. A lot of my colleagues and friends outside of the African American community and a few inside have trouble understanding the outrage and the looting and the turmoil that has resulted from some of the protests and demonstrations. But I have to tell you, a kicked dog, kicked enough will bite. And this is what we're seeing, the reaction to an oppressed people. Panelists, you have done a wonderful job setting the table. We've got some questions that have been submitted in advance, and several of them have been answered already. But what I would like to ask our panelists, and this is a challenge to do, I know, because of the time, I want to get time for questions from those who are participating in the Zoom too, who've joined us. But I'd like to ask my panelists if you could keep your remarks to 45 seconds to a minute and a half at most. And if it's shorter than that, that's fine, because we want to get to as many of these questions as we possibly can. If y'all can help me with that, we'll be fine. Our first question is to our students. And you've answered the first part of it in terms of how the recent murders of Floyd, Taylor, and Arbery have personally impacted you. Some of you have answered that. But I want you to answer specifically, what is one thing that your LSU community can do to support you and your constituencies? And we'll take a few responses to that.
I'd like to say something. I think it really starts with holding racists who are in our school and who have infiltrated our faculty accountable, because it is very hard for us to even begin the process of moving forward if we have RAs, if we have campus leaders and whatnot who have been on video and have been complicit in oppressing other students and students of color in a very heinous and overt way. And if there continues to be a cycle of unaccountability that continues, then it will enable other students to perpetuate this type of violence onto students, and this cycle will continue, and then we will not be able to move on. So I know me personally, and I know a lot of other students would feel a lot better and be able to navigate this situation better if we knew that on campus we were supported not only by mouth, but by action that would hold people accountable for oppressing us on and off campus.
If I can make remarks, I would say that another thing that we can do along those lines is educate ourselves. Education is very powerful because once we learn that it's not enough to make a statement or post a square saying that you're against racism, once you really educated on the matter, you develop this internal sense to do more and to work harder and to keep others accountable, as Kiami was saying. And so I think that if we can educate ourselves, educate the people around us, reach out and make the effort to take a stand about these things, and to learn these things, that could go a long way.
So for me, I think a big part that our movement is working towards is transparency in all departments. Because I think that's something that's very, very important, because if you're not well versed on the resources, on the various policies, procedures, all that stuff that the university has in place, it's so easy to be afraid of them. I mean, personally, I've been through a lot of these processes, and while I was in it, I was extremely terrified because I had no idea what was coming next. And so that in itself, like, can easily just like dissolve any tensions between, you know, departments or between students and faculty, stuff like that, and give a better and more welcoming environment for students. So.
Something else I like to add is also the introduction of adding all that to the table, because the problem is when we're having these discussions are the fact that there are just Black students there. If we start, like, you know, having school-wide events where white students have to be there as well, then they can't ignore, like, they can't be ignorant anymore. They can't ignore the racism that's happening. If we keep having these conversations just by ourselves, no one will ever hear them. The people that actually need to hear them, the racists that are saying such harmful things to, like, students of color. So, like, just more introduction on, like, all different demographics will be so much more helpful.
Yeah, I'll also like to add that LSU does offer a lot of resources and opportunities, but a lot of them are not, it's small. And when you look at a big university as LSU, it can only do but so much. Even if you look at the mental health, you know, it's only short-term counseling that's provided. And so you have to seek outside. And so a lot of Black students who like counseling, even if they go talk to someone just for that one short-term counseling, you know, it's hard when you speak to someone that cannot relate to the experience or understand. And they might have empathy and they could relate, and they can try to relate, but it's something about in which, you know, certain responses. And so I don't know if that's a matter of getting more representation will help, or even if it's training. I'm not sure if that's something you can necessarily teach, the struggles, because if it's hard to imagine what it's like to walk in someone else's shoe. And so I think making sure those resources are open, like Frederick Alicia was saying, making sure it's open to everyone, not just those who are interested in it. Because there are, like, for example, I went to a multicultural leadership conference my first year here, and it was phenomenal. It was eye-opening for me as a 30-year-old woman. I was blown away. Like, there was so much I didn't even know that I didn't realize I didn't know. But I was seeking that information. As soon as it came across my table somehow, I wanted to go. And I was one of maybe 2 in my department that I know that went to that. So that needs to change.
Thank you all students for your responses to that question. And Unique, you teed me up nicely for a question from Miranda. But I wanted to remind the rest of our participants that you can also answer these questions in the in the chat box as you see fit, because we are gathering this information and it will be helpful to hear your voice as well. But Miranda, I wanted you to respond to Unique's question or challenge to the limited resources that we do have over mental health services. But I will let you all know that in the time that I've been here, we have increased the number of underrepresented mental health practitioners to service our underrepresented population and our entire population as well, so that they can match up. But I want Miranda, if you could briefly tell us about some of the resources that are available, and then if you would put links in the chat for others.
Okay, everything that you said is very true, Unique. I think the reason that the model became a short-term model for MHS is because of the large amount of students and the small amount of staff. So that you can service multiple students, you have to shorten the time that you see one or two, a small group of students. So you can't keep them long term if you want to see more people. So then it became a part of wellness and health promotions, which is a part of the Student Health Center. They're located on the second floor. They offer kind of some other things outside of just counseling. They do some nutrition counseling. They do, if you're in trouble for certain things, drinking or having some substance abuse issues, they can help with those things as well. And they handle a lot of outreach activities which would give other people the ability to have access to services, but not necessarily have to come to counseling. We also have Let's Talk that has been, we've been working with the AACC. I was there a couple of times this semester, and that program was a way for students to just come, have an anonymous, you didn't have to give your name. It's a little demographic, but you gave your name. You didn't have to give a name, but you could pose like a situation or a question, and we could give you some guidance very quickly. It's like a 15-minute check-in, it's what we would call it. And then you can decide if you need counseling, and we could give you further information on how to access counseling or any other services that you were looking for based on what you were needing. So we do, and we also have some services where we called emotional wisdom. When we were in person, we had those times where you could just come. They were held on certain days, and you could come and get a toolkit of coping skills. And you didn't have to commit to therapy, but you could just attend those seminars on those days if you had the chance to. So we have some services that are available for everyone, even if you're not interested in just sitting in front of a therapist. And unique, having a culturally diverse staff is very important to me, and that is something that I have personally mentioned since I've been at the center. So that is something that we talk about. It's not a lot of us particularly. So you have to really work hard to get good culturally competent staff members, especially in mental health and in the profession that we're in. But as well, we are challenging those around us to be culturally competent, and we are having those conversations. We are having those conversations. We've been having them this week, especially, and the staff there is very aware and very supportive, and they want to be a catalyst for change during this movement. So I hope that gave you guys some information, and I will see the best way to give you kind of the information.
If you would drop a couple of links, just a couple, the address, email address to the center, that would be great.
Okay.
Before we move to our next question, I do see that Maxine wants to respond. If that's okay, we'll take a quick response from Maxine.
Actually, I put it in the chat, but I will tell you, I can see the frustration when people talk about what individuals do, and too often people see racism as what happens in front of their faces by an individual, and they call them racist and they want to change that. But what we find in Dialogue on Race is that when institutions change, attitudes and behavior follows. So institutional change has the biggest impact on changing those individuals that you're concerned about.
Thank you.
All right, so we do want to pose another question. This one, I guess, would be more directed towards our administration or our staff. And I just want to point out a few statistics also with this question. We currently have 13% of the LSU population who identify as Black, but less than 5% of faculty on campus are Black. So you can see the gross difference in ratio for that. And what is LSU doing to recruit and retain these, as I like to refer to, kings and queens? How will LSU create more competitive offer letters for Black PhDs to apply for tenure track professorships?
Yeah, we saw that, Tyler. Thank you. We've seen those numbers, and we heard that last night. And Gideon, I think that's the number one issue in the and Devin is nodding in the platform. And I'll invite Stacy to add to my comments, but I think there are definitely things that we can do. Again, I'm going back to Devin. It's education too. I mean, we've got to educate the people who are searching. How can we find folks of color to apply for these positions? How can we convince them that LSU is a place where they want to be? How can we support them as they move through the process? And I'll say something we had at the University of Tennessee, and Stacy and I have talked about this, is at the University of Tennessee, every search committee had to meet with a diversity officer before the search started and talk about how can you have diverse pools. And then at least for every major search, positions of a certain level, the pool had to be reviewed before it went forward, again, by our Office of Diversity, to see what efforts were taken to do that. So those are the kind of things that I think we can and want to discuss. I also know something that's been going on. I won't go on and on, I'm sorry. But I also know something else that's been going on is that Derek has been working on a roadmap to diversity. And that there's a draft of that document. I think Derek probably drafted in April. And so that's moving, and it's moving faster now.
It's actually a final draft. It's not a draft, but it hasn't been completed.
Final, thank you. There's a final draft. And so I'll stop there. And Stacy, I don't know if you would.
Well, I would just echo that. So Derek has led a task force of faculty, staff, and students, and they have 5 separate strategies and around the topic of ensuring we recruit diverse faculty to our campus. I think that there is more to work for us to do there. It's getting them here, but it's also keeping them here. So there are 2 pieces of that, and we ask a tremendous amount of our underrepresented faculty from underrepresented groups because they're as you know, they are stretched in many, many different ways. So both of those, both for our faculty and for our staff, that group has done an amazing job of articulating a plan for how we can tackle that issue. And Tom mentioned several pieces of that just in terms of the functional ways in which we bring those faculty to campus, but it's also incumbent upon us for them to know you are joining a place that is changing, and we will want you to be a part of that, and articulating that and ensuring that when they arrive, we are delivering on that to be their ally and their partner. So I commend Derek and his group for working since August, Derek, because these are challenging issues, obviously, and it will take, as the president has said, commitment on our part to then put that plan into action.
And I will also echo that the notion of especially what Dr. Gallagher mentioned in terms of reviewing these committees. It's ironic the timing of that, because I shared with Provost Haney last night my frustration with the finalist pool that was presented this week. We do review as best we can, but we don't have a formal process that makes it stop through the Office of Diversity. And that's a link that we'd like to see in place. We also do visit with all of the major searches. They're required to do a training on diversity to increase the pool's diversity and to have an advocate in each search to ensure that they have done that. We haven't been as successful as we need to, but we've gotten to almost every department. Every college has been visited in the last 3 years with those searches, search training. So we're going to keep doing that. I want to move us to our next question. And Tyler, if you would allow, because we're going to run out of time and we want to stop at 2:30. I want to ask a question that's a little off script, because we have Chief Murphy Paul here. And he is the chief of the Baton Rouge Police Department. Chief Paul, could you speak to the students particularly about how to effectively engage law enforcement in a protest, and then two, how can law enforcement effectively engage with the community? And I'm sorry, you've got a minute and a half to do that, but go.
Okay, I'll try to take them in 2 parts. First, with law enforcement, it's because there's a conversation I have with my kids. I'm the father of 4 Black boys, and it's unfortunately, but even as the chief of police, I have that same conversation that many parents have with their kids. And that's because, look, I've been there. I understand what, I've been a victim of racial profiling. I've been the victim of police abuse, living in the city of New Orleans. So I've lived that. So I find myself having a different conversation when I speak to my kids, because I have that father hat on. But as the chief of police, you know, we partner with NAACP, and we actually have a course that's mutual respect. I believe they call it respect and authority, and I asked them to change it to mutual respect, because I want you to get past that, right? I want you to comply. I want you to educate yourself, which is something that we do. We educate young, particularly African-American boys, on what good policing looks like. And we tell them we show them what bad policing looks like. And we ask them to cooperate. We ask them to comply, because we want them to get past that traffic stop. And then we tell them what to do when it's not professional policing, and we provide contact information and you know, what we look for in law enforcement. So for me, I want you to comply, and then when that behavior is unprofessional, we want you to file a complaint here in Baton Rouge and give us the opportunity to do it. Specifically, what's going on in Baton Rouge, we are telling our police officers that you are hurting, the community's hurting, we are hurting, and right now is our time to listen, because we understand the pain. And the quote was, we're going to use as much restraint as we can, but we're going to make sure that all the protests are done peacefully. We're going to allow the community to heal at its own pace. And we're going to sit back and we're going to allow you to do that and do everything within our power to make sure that you can do that in a peaceful way.
Thank you so much.
All right, we do want to prompt on to the next question. I guess this will be somewhat directed to you as well. So in particular, as a Black woman, I know I've heard on the LSU's campus, one of the big concerns is the protection for Black women. And I wanted to ask, how would you respond to the notion that many Black women on LSU's campus and in the BR community in general, I am a Baton Rouge native, born and raised, they don't feel as if they can come to law enforcement and be a priority to law enforcement, whether it be with like sexual crimes, hate crimes, harassment, etc. And we've seen on a national scale that many of the Black men who have been victims of police brutality or hate crimes have had their perpetrators or their killers arrested and indicted. We've seen that with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, but it hasn't been seen like Black women become an afterthought. For example, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and so many other countless women that B-Way have actually highlighted recently. So how would you respond to that? What efforts are being taken to make Black women or women of color in general feel as if they're seen as a priority when they do come to the law enforcement with any problems or issues?
And I think that was directed at Chief, but he has dropped off. We're going to go to our next question, and if he pops back on, he is actively working as a chief of police. So we're going to go ahead to our next question. In light of the demonstrations that occurred on campus this week, the question is, does the university have any plans in place to ensure that students are able to voice their concerns with the university, either anonymously or publicly?
So before the administration does answer that question, I'd like to preface that question with currently we've been in contact with several students across campus and in various departments who feel as though like their voice has been stifled due to fear of losing their scholarships, losing their admissions, losing their place, their employment, stuff like that. So that was the premise in asking that question, because we don't want students to feel as though speaking out against any form of discrimination or prejudice within any individual department might have them, having backlash or repercussions in some sort of fashion.
Yeah, that's a really fair question. Yes, there is the ability to anonymously communicate and let us know of incidents. The issue with anonymity can point us in a direction. It's harder to take action when there's anonymity, but yes, you can anonymously tell us when something is going on. And the other thing is that I would hope, and Gideon, when we meet on Tuesday, Devin, I don't know if you're going to be with us or others as well, but we can talk about how to safely one, keep that communication going regularly between you and the president's office and the provost's office, and two, build relationships so that you can come and talk to us. There's anonymity, there's also confidentiality, right? So if a student may not be anonymous, but there's certain things can't be kept confidential. But as long as everybody understands that we can have those conversations. So yes.
We also had a question about students reporting incidents beyond that, and the limited way in which it's done. We do have a LSU Cares button on the front page, on the home page of the website, and we're going to work to get that a little more prominent so that people can report and understand what it's all about. And we have a whole team that looks at, investigates those situations. The question that was raised was concerning the lack of response and action following that. And I have to tell you that there are some limitations in responding to complaints of racism, bias, and others, but every single one is heard. And given the climate that we're in, I think you'll see a bit more action. I want to, Tammy has her hand raised up, so I'm going to give her.
I'm sorry. I just really couldn't let the moment pass before it became irrelevant. But I do want to direct something respectfully towards Chief Murphy, if possible. So I just want to address some of the things that you said and some of your rhetoric that for me personally was kind of scary. So two things that I heard you say, we're kind of trying to teach Black people how to navigate our interactions with the police by teaching us how to check out good policing, how to talk, and how to act. But the problem is, I'm from New York City, so we all know about the NYPD. And regardless of what your interactions with the police are and how respectable you are, I remember I was in a Catholic school uniform at 14 years old, and a police officer talked to me with his hand on his gun the entire time. And I know that I have never been disrespectful in interactions with BRPD or LSUPD, but that has not kept these interactions from being de-escalated. And the second thing that I heard was you say that we're going to keep these protests peaceful. So something that just popped up in my head is the idea that, does that mean that if these protests by any means escalate to any level, does that mean or imply that there will be violent action against these student protesters? And that type of rhetoric kind of scares me. And I think that we need to bring that dialogue back to these interactions, because that's kind of a scary narrative. So yeah, just wanted to.
And Chief Paul, while you have the floor, there was a question raised about the disproportionate number of arrests and prosecutions of victims when they are Black males versus when they are Black females. Now, I don't know if you can handle both of those, but.
Well, I think it's three. I never got an opportunity to answer the first question. My phone came in and kicked me out. I had an incoming call, but I think the question was relates to females who are victims of violence and our response to that. One of the things that I saw when we came in was there's a lot of VOCA dollars out there. There's Victims of Crime Act. I believe in 2015 it was over $1 billion, and there's always money, but we haven't done a good job of proactively going out there and identify those dollars. Speaking VOCA dollars right now, we're working to write a grant to take advantage of that. We put a female, one of our female detectives in a full-time position as our victims assistance coordinator to make sure that she's addressing the concerns and needs of victims who are crime. So we are moving forward with that. We're working with the sheriff's office as well as the district attorney's office with our victims assistance coordinator position. So that was something that was done last year that we started doing. As it relates,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was just asking you to answer that very impassioned question by Kiami.
Yeah. So I think that there's confusion when I say victims. It's unfortunate there are some outside interests that we are aware of that are attempting, like we see in other places across the country, to use this as an opportunity for those to conduct businesses, fires, and things of that nature. And that's what I'm speaking of. We are aware of that. We've received information on those, but these are not the peaceful protesters. These are not the individuals here who want to express their anger, their frustration, and their displeasure to what's going on in America. So that's what I was speaking of when I say, we're going to make sure that it's peaceful protests, that we try to have the conversations with those individuals who are trying to stop what we're trying to do here as a community.
And I want to help on that too. Kiame brings up a point that many folks in this room have experienced, in this Zoom room have experienced, being appropriate with law enforcement and being treated very differently than what was described. It is unfortunate that particularly African Americans have to have the conversations with their sons and daughters about how to encounter law enforcement. When they do what was instructed, they still are met with force and violence. Anybody seen the video of the Atlanta students as they were assaulted, doing nothing but, and to be fair, there was retribution for those officers, but the systemic part of this is I think what Kiame was speaking to.
Yeah, and I want to clarify when I say we're teaching, that is a collective effort. We received a grant. We wrote a grant up, and it's called Collective Healing. It's through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's Louisiana State University, Southern University, 100 Black Men, Capital Area Human Services. So we're in partnership with that teaching that I was talking about. So it's not like the police are just there teaching. There's young kids there. We're having conversations just like we're having now. It's a very positive thing. That actually course is now been being put on by 100 Black Men. So they're putting on that course, and we just explain to them what good policing looks like, what we don't accept, and help provide avenues to help us identify who those police officers are. LSU did the research on the police officer side on the surveys, and I believe the Southern University did the community side of it. So we have seen some progress in this community when it comes to that collective healing initiative.
Thank you.
All right, so I did want to pose the next question, and this is directed to any of the staff or any administration, even the students on their feelings on it. Students currently have to live and learn in buildings named after people who are known for being historically racist. I know like Middleton Library, Kirby Hall, even some of the buildings within the Pentagon, and they're greeted by a mural in Allen Hall that takes them back to slavery struggle to enter buildings that remain inaccessible, and they walk down halls where there are pictures of past deans and executive leaders who show the absence of Blackness. There are no Black peers on those walls. And we wonder if we'll ever be or create spaces for Black Greeks to live in and congregate, as you've seen on Southern's campus. They actually do have that, even though they are HBCU. So we just want to know kind of what is the plan for making LSU a more physically welcoming and inclusive campus, not just a diverse campus, because there is a certain difference between inclusivity and diversity.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one on the buildings issue, the names of buildings and the names of spaces, that I think that's something, Derek, that I think that's in your roadmap as well as a subject that we need to address and we need to talk about. And we know, Tyler, that the names we could talk about the Confederate era, but it extends because it both precedes and extends. So I've already asked for a list of named buildings and places on campus that at least my folks, and I would love your perspective on this too, because it's different than mine, is that are offensive because of what they represent. Ultimately, this will be a Board of Supervisors question, but it's a hard, I think in some ways, maybe we haven't talked about this out loud in the past because it's a hard question, but we got to talk about it and we got to address it. So yes, and I was trying to answer that question in the chat, but I guess I'm not dexterous enough in the chat function. So thank you. Eric, I don't know if you want to add anything on what's in the roadmap. Yeah,
it might. I can't remember honestly if it's expressly worded the way that Tyler worded it, but it is part of what we want to have conversations about. And I can tell you that just last night on the news, there was a student petition with over 1,400 signatures asking for the same. When I arrived in 2014, there were cries to remove the name Middleton off of the library. And so this is not new. This is something that has been going on. We work closely with our Black Alumni Association, many of whom came through LSU in the 80s and 90s. And they have expressed concern about things being the same as when they were here. To the mural in Allen Hall, that's another piece of art that has come under scrutiny. I've been informed that it isn't slavery, but it's an agrarian society in the early 20th century. But nevertheless, it without that explanation, it does put one in a certain kind of mindset. I will tell you that if you go into the art and design building, you're going to see a 3-story mural depicting our first African-American faculty member. And this is started earlier this year, but it's a beautiful representation of a leader. That's not enough. That's not enough. And so I applaud the students for wanting to see these changes and removing some of these names. We effectively led a campaign a year or so ago to change the name of Raphael Sims Drive. That is the address, ironically, for the African American Culture Center and the Women's Center. We got that done without a whole lot of fanfare and changed it to Veterans Drive. And I think we're going to be able to do some more changes, but it is going to be a board call.
I just wanted to mention that UVA today, their board just voted on a name removal and one that was replaced with the Black Pioneer at the institution. So I say all that to say, as UVA is grappling with its own complex history, definitely connected to enslaved labor, but they're also moving forward in really courageous ways. And I think it is difficult, challenging conversations. I applaud the board for doing that, but I would say these are important issues that as the students bring up, you just can't ultimately let die, because this is cyclical, right? It'll come back around again. And I just think this is an important moment in time to, again, leverage, have these really tough conversations and encourage and implore the board to ultimately move forward in a way that recognizes this, because a lot of these you can attach back to research that has the connection even to the learning outcomes of the students, right? More diverse faculty, or creating a stronger sense of belonging in the communities that they are. So anyway, I just think there's strong reasoning behind it. Again, appreciate the student sentiments, but showing even today that level of action, even at UVA, which some were not sure would happen, but the board kind of taking action there.
And there are other schools doing the same. So I think this is a great time, given the pressures of the day, to begin having those conversations and actually taking some action. Dr. Haney, you look like you wanted to say something on that. I'm sorry.
No, I was just in agreement. There's a process and a naming committee, and as the president mentioned, and then it would be submitted to the board.
Thank you. We have a
Dr.
couple of.
Ramirez, there were some suggestions.
I'm sorry,
Dr. There was just a suggestion that we do move to some of the questions in the Q&A, since we are
that's where we are.
time doing that.
And I don't see them on my screen right now. So
See if you
want to take one, Tyler, if you see it right away?
Yes, sir. So I did have one. Okay, this recently, actually, we did discuss this in Senate recently. So someone did ask, why is AAAS not a department yet? So if there are some Senate people on here that are in student government and have anything they'd like to add on that, or any administration as well, just a brief answer to that question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I observed that Senate meeting. I would like to say thank you again. I know it was mentioned earlier, but to Alasia Johnson and Kiara Miller, phenomenal senators, and to the other authors of the bill. The resolution was passed to make AAAS a department. It's my understanding that now has to be brought to the dean of HSS, so that they can begin to work in plans to fund the department and things of that matter.
Dr. Haney, could you speak a bit about the process too?
Right. So I think that that resolution is terrific. I think it would also, obviously, there's also faculty governed matters as well. So the faculty of AAAS would be in partnership with the dean. to have those conversations about moving that to a departmental status, and then also focusing on the curriculum issues, some of which were mentioned here in terms of moving that to a department. It is now an interdisciplinary program, so that would be, again, working with the faculty and the dean.
All right, so there was an additional, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Rivera.
Yeah, I have a question here that says, if we acknowledge the violence upon which policing is founded with LSU, follow the example of the University of Maryland in scaling back its partnerships with Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge police departments. Is there any movement to scale back a relationship with our BR police department? That's directed, I believe, to Dr. Gallagher.
Yeah, there are not that I've seen. This is the first that I've heard of it, but I appreciate it. I think the chief is on, and I think the first steps would be for us to continue to work together with BRPD and RPD to try to make it better and improve it. So,
and I would add to that we have had a very good working relationship. In Minnesota, they had a situation that they responded to because that was where Mr. Floyd was killed. And we have not had that situation to interrupt our campus relationship with BRPD. Witness Chief Murphy Paul taking a segment of his afternoon to be with us. And so I'm going to encourage continued dialogue with BRPD, but not only them, with LSU PD. I put in the chat there, by the way, there is an anonymous line for LSU PD. We've worked with them, and they are willing to work with us. And I think Kiami said it best. We've got to figure out a way to better educate law enforcement on how to deal with us, as opposed to just educating us to deal with law enforcement. There was also a question I'm gonna answer real quick, and I'll turn it back to Tyler in terms of a required course for freshmen. Several people asked this question, a required course for all freshmen, all students on multiculturalism. And that is part of the roadmap. We're talking about, instead of a required course, which we found does not significantly work, and I appreciate if Kevin could speak to this, the required diversity 101 course, if you will, simply appeases those who are committed to diversity. Those who reject diversity find it pretty tough and don't really want to participate, and it doesn't really accomplish as much. So what we're proposing is to have a core of courses that would be in the general ed requirements, a core that might include 30 to 35 courses that we've already identified that have a multicultural approach, that the students would be then able to select 2 of those courses to meet a diversity requirement for graduation. Kevin, could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And to your earlier point, Derek, the feedback has been that oftentimes those requirements are also surface level and don't speak to some of the important issues being raised today, like anti-racism and the like, and important coursework there. The one benefit of that you've also mentioned, the additional benefit of having a core set of courses, is that it also provides an opportunity, and I saw this at Virginia Tech, for departments like African American Studies or any other kind of area specific that could work with schools like engineering or architecture or the like, to ultimately weave in and show students who are on a particular trajectory with regard to their own professional aspirations, the connection between that area and some of their own academic pursuits. And so I think there's a benefit in thinking about the courses, not just the existing courses, potentially collaborations that could happen to create additional new courses that are actually a connection between some of your identity specific departments and those broader areas that the students may be having as their own academic discipline. So
thank you.
Question about slave labor keeps on coming up. I think that if we ignore it, it'll look intentional. So.
Yeah, I think I replied to Tyler privately. On that one.
I got it. We were just pushed for time, so it's like 2:30, so we didn't want to extend. We know everyone's time is precious. We didn't want to take more of anyone's time. So he did definitely respond to me, Kiami, because I got that. I saw the article, I actually read it myself. So that's definitely something that I and President Gallagher, and I hope and many other members can discuss and talk about and learn more about. But definitely it is 2:30, so we do want to move into more of our closing remarks and just start to wrap things up. And hopefully we can have another discussion, because obviously there's so many issues that need to be addressed that the hour and a half can't really suffice on. So we will have to try to organize something else. But if the panelists would just like to give their remaining time, their closing remarks, it's really about like 2 minutes, and we can just wrap it up and try to be done by.
We're gonna actually ask them to do it in about 30 to 60 because we're right at the hour. So if we could start with Unique.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we do meet again and actually talk about resolutions, because it's great mentioning all the things that are happening and all, but like Tyler said, we need to discuss again. And I did see mentions of departments with like, what do Black graduate and doctoral fellows do when they don't have representation and they have aggressive and bigoted professors? And as graduate students, we have to work with them. So this is a big concern for us. And I do want to make sure these questions get highlighted. And I want to make sure that our voice is a part of those conversations as well, because our degree depends on these relationships with these professors, and they can make our time at LSU while pursuing our PhD or even master's very difficult and challenging, in addition to everything else that goes in the community. Thank you.
Dr. McDonald?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the level of racial trauma that occurs and is compounded when incidents like this happen, and that there's a cost for this and a loss for the communities that institutions like LSU or UVA and others serve. And so just encourage the university not to lose sight of that, and to make sure that there's supportive mechanisms in place that meet the needs of their faculty, staff, students, alumni, even local community members, but recognize that both with that trauma also is recognized the capacity of the institution to do something about it. And this is a time that the research talks about having a high capacity to be able to respond, not a low capacity.
Okay, Kiami.
Hi, just thank you for this opportunity. And I just call on everybody to be aware of the way that COVID-19 intermingling with all the protests that are happening right now will definitely disproportionately affect Black and Brown students who are returning back on LSU's campus. I call you to do more than just say there aren't qualified Black and Brown professors. I call us to do more than just say that we have to ask permission, because honestly, for me personally, I would rather ask for forgiveness than permission. And I just call students who are listening to this to continue to be revolutionaries, continue to be radical, and do not be scared, because I will be there right with you. And thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Miranda Brown, please.
I appreciate the questions that were directed toward the mental health services, and I did list some information in the chat at what we're currently offering, and we definitely heard those things, and we will be having discussions to see how we can better meet the needs of what our African American students are asking for. And I appreciate being here, and I want to continue to be a part of the conversation and a part of the change. Thank you, guys.
All right, and next we will have Ms. Fredlicia Phillips.
I was very grateful for being on this panel today. I think this is truly what the town hall is called, the voices of the unheard, the anger, everyone's frustrations finally coming out, and I hope we continue to have these meetings in the future. And I just want everyone to keep educating themselves on racism, because that's one of the foundational arguments of all of these issues, the fact that people are not educated enough. And I hope that the university continues to strive to have more mandatory discussions on this. But I think we're at an amazing start.
All right, and Chief Paul, if you'd like to go ahead as well.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I want to just cover some things right quick, because I know we got a lot of work of many in this community, and I get that. But I just want to just highlight some things that we have done. We do have de-escalation training. Officers must give verbal warnings before shooting unless they're in imminent danger. Officers cannot use force must use force cannot use force without trying to de-escalate situations first. We don't use chokeholds and strangleholds. Police cannot shoot at moving vehicles unless the driver in itself is posing immediate threat. Mandatory intervention for police officers to intervene when another officer is using excessive force. We do require comprehensive reporting. We do have a use of force continuum. All of these things have happened recently. We have a body camera program that exceeds DOJ expectations, where we're using technology where body camera automatically comes on when your gun comes out the holster, when you use your taser, when your lights come on, when there's a gunshot in the area. There's gunshot technology, microphones inside the body cameras. Procedural justice and implicit bias training is mandatory now in all of our academy. We started that last year. We trained our officers in importance where we're addressing those tenets of giving a voice to those we have contact with, fairness, respect, trustworthiness. We started our Explorer program where we're teaching young kids about public service, 14 to 21. We even created positions within the police department. That's from ages 14 to 21, an Explorer program. And we created positions this year actually to hire those individuals who are in college or graduating from high school who want to work for the police department. And when they become eligible and meet the minimum qualifications, they can become in our next police academy. So those are some of the things that we're doing. But one thing, online complaints, you can file complaints online. We made complaints easily accessible, but the early intervention program is one of our biggest ones. That's where we track behavior. So we actually track complaints, use of force incidents, focus on the behavior, and that's what we've been doing. So those are a few things that we've done in the reform side. We got a lot of work to do, and we look forward.
Thank you all. For the sake of time, we do have to move on to the next one, but I do want to thank you for highlighting those points for us. So we will have to move on to our next person, Mr. Gideon, if you'd like to also give your closing statements.
I should say thank you to everyone that was on this panel, as well as all those who posed a question. I want to encourage everyone to please continue asking your questions to everyone on this panel, as well as to your student leaders who are championing this movement. Again, like the President Tom Galligan said, we'll be meeting with him sometime next week to discuss, how to move forward. So again, we implore you to continue to advocate, share your stories, share your experiences, so we can properly, in these meetings, we can properly make legislation, make policies that, impact students in the way that they want to be impacted. So please, again, be sure to advocate, and share everything. LSU, OMA, OOD, the Blackout page, we're all open, we're all ears, and we look forward to hearing from you guys.
All right, and Ms. Maxine Crump, if you'd like to take about 1 minute to give your closing remarks as well.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to compliment the chief on the use of the word mutual respect and many of the other things that he said, but I think language is very powerful. And so I would say that I would want everyone to be aware that the media and the elected official use 3 words that are not that helpful, and that's healing, the talk, and peaceful protest. Healing's not as valuable because it assumes that we can heal without really facing the problem and going through it. We go through healing, and then there has to be a check to see what we have to define what healing looks like. The second thing is the talk needs to not be called unfortunate, needs to be called wrong, and shouldn't happen to any citizen in this country that the parents who are Black have to give this talk. And the third thing about peaceful protest overrides what the protesters are demanding. And I think media and elected officials should start speaking to that, the message of the protest way more than speaking of peace, because the protests need to be called nonviolent, not peaceful.
I would add before we move to the next that Ms. Crump also shared with me that she wants to continue the conversation about bringing dialogue on race to the LSU campus in a more formal way. And so thank you for that. We also, and I'm busy running 100 things. Kevin, did you get a chance to give a closing statement? Okay, so next we will hear from Dr. Haney.
I, again, am such a fan of Maxine and following her words. That's an impossibility. I just am grateful for everybody today, and I am looking forward to continuing to listen and learn.
Dr. Galligan, and Devin, you'll get the last word.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I agree. Let's meet again. Maxine, I've been trying to get to a dialogue on race for a long time, so please sign me up and sign us up on the campus to try to extend the scope. I said I was going to listen, and I listened, and I listened, and I made my lists, but I also listened with my heart. And I heard a couple things, and I reflected on my life. I realized with my kids, my wife, Susan, and I told them, if you get stopped in the car by the police, sorry, Chief, if you get stopped in the car by the police, don't let them search the car. No matter what you have, you don't know what your friends have. So don't let them search the car. I realize, I hear, and I've learned, if I was a Black parent, I would have had a very different conversation, which was don't get killed. And that's not right. My wife loves to walk into homes under construction with her friends. She looks at them. She comes out and she tells me about the house. Imagine Ahmaud Arbery did that and he got killed. I get the privilege and I feel guilty that I have that privilege. Let me say, so I'm talking about myself as a person. Now somebody said, I'm over my 30 seconds, I apologize. Somebody said, how do you hold us accountable? Us. Well, as an individual, I think I'm not like that. I don't do that. But I'm in this chair. So in this chair, I am the voice of the institution. The history is not good. So I say to everybody, I apologize for the history as the voice of the institution. But today is a day for change. We got to own our history. We can't be defensive about it because we did it. But we got to work together to make change. Gideon, Devin, anybody else who's going to be with us next week, I look forward to our meeting next week, and I also look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you, and I apologize that I went on too long.
Devin?
Okay, thank you to all the panelists for coming out. Thank you to participants. A couple of things that I wanted to address very quickly. A lot of people are calling for this conversation to continue. In addition to the 38 Q&A questions, last night the panelists had written up over 40 questions. So one thing I want to say is, first of all, this will not be the last time that this happens. This will not be the last time that we meet, and I will make sure of it. The Black student leaders on campus are advocating for you guys. A week and 2 days ago, Black student leaders got together and said, we need to make a statement, and it went from that to this. So know that anybody who's out there typing your questions, we will always be able to hear you. Whoever's organizing the hosts, please link all the information of the panelists to the participants. This is how you guys hold us accountable to the participants. Please continue to contact us with your questions. And we will do our part to press ourselves on getting those questions heard, to press administration, to press the students to keep fighting. This is what we mean by accountability, because these talks matter, and these accountability platforms matter, and the policies matter, and all of that comes together to show you guys that Black lives matter, and that's what we're trying to get at. So with that being said, thank you.
I would ask my co-host to offer a closing remark.
Well, first, I want to say I'm humbled, for one, by the willingness of people who are, I'm Christian. I grew up in the church. So like I always said, let them not despise your youth. And I want to say that to everyone on here. I want to thank the older people who have the wisdom that we do need. Thank you for being so humble enough to actually listen to us and allow us to speak our voices on this platform. And to those who are the student leaders, along with myself and so many others in BWA and BMLI and Black student organizations, let no one despise your youth, because obviously your youth is what is propelling the change in this country that everyone needs. And I'm so excited to say that someday when my children ask me, Mom, what were you doing during 2020? I was doing things to make change for you. And literally I'm so excited to be at LSU and to be around so many young Black people who are as passionate about this as me. And so to see this, I'm phenomenal. This will not be the last conversation, guaranteed. Just thank you for allowing me to be your co-moderator, Professor Rivera. I'm so excited. I thank you so much. And to everyone else, you have a great day and you stay blessed.
And to the final word that has been given to me, I would echo the sentiment of gratitude, not only for the panelists, and in particular, our panelists from outside the LSU community who have joined us, Dr. McDonald, Maxine Crump, and Chief Murphy Paul. We really appreciate you taking times out of your busy schedules to be with us. This is very, very generous, and it is not taken lightly. And we hope that you stay in conversation, and I know you all, and we will. But you are all part of our LSU community, so thank you. To the panelists, students, you did a great job, and I hats off to you. I heard something, and somebody commented about it. President Galligan actually offered an apology for LSU's transgressions and failures in the past, and that's fairly uncommon. Again, their words, and I think the actions that follow will demonstrate the sincerity of our efforts to make change and make LSU a more inclusive and welcoming campus for all. This conversation, as was repeated often, will continue. We actually are planning an event now for next week that will have a larger scale, maybe, but will give us another chance to dialogue and to share. And we will continue these conversations throughout the summer. So I'd ask that you stay tuned to your social media channels and also engage, much like Tyler challenged, especially our students. We can only do as much as you want us to do. Regardless of how much power you think we might have as administrators or presidents, we do nothing without the students. It's always going to come down to you guys. Thank everyone, and certainly I want to thank my staff for helping putting this together. This was a phenomenal bit of work done by a number of people. You see several of them on your screen: Anne-Marie, Percy, and Franklin. Behind the scenes, people like Ivante and Michelle. There are a number of people who have put work into this, and we thank you for that. I wish you all the same blessings that my co-host wished, and I ask that you all keep an eye on one another and keep pushing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Appreciate the conversation.